So, Emma, what are you thinking about this week?
Well, sadly, I am thinking about funerals. Back at the beginning of the pandemic, when we first went into lockdown, when there was still so much that we didn't know about the virus, when there was so much fear and anxiety, when what we did know was that this was a virus that spread quickly and that it kills people, when we feared our medical system would be overrun. Back in those early days, rabbis had to ask morbid questions and try to prepare ourselves for what was coming. How many of our loved ones and community members were going to be lost? Were we heading into a year of far too many funerals? Could we even hold funerals? Would funeral homes be over capacity? Would bodies be able to be buried or would they have to be cremated? Could you catch the virus from a corpse? How would funeral homes and cemetery staff protect themselves? How would rabbis protect themselves? And then, once we knew we could have funerals, sort of, we had to adapt them. Which rituals and prayers would be unchanged? Which would need to be adapted? Would we want to introduce new rituals? What does a funeral look like on Zoom and a Shiva? I remember webinars where rabbis discussed these questions together. I remember saying to my colleagues that we had to be prepared for the worst. I thought so many people would die. I thought so many funerals were in my future. We had to ask each other if we were willing to risk our own lives to go and stand with mourners. I had to decide that I was willing. These were the questions we had to try to ask and answer. Many of our rabbinic and Jewish communities adapted quickly. Here in Cape Town, we have limited numbers at the cemetery where we keep things outdoors only, where masks and gloves are expected and necessary, where we can't hug people, we can't place our hands quietly on the backs of mourners as they watch their loved ones being lowered into the grave. We can barely see one another's faces, where we have to learn how to convey with our eyes what we used to have a whole range of facial expressions to convey, where we have to be stern with mourners who reach out for us, where we have to figure out how to add in a camera and a microphone and Zoom links to all our other logistical arrangements. In the very first weeks of lockdown, I officiated at a funeral for an older woman. Her death was not COVID related. All of South Africa was forbidden to leave their homes, except for workers who were necessary. Just before lockdown, we had received guidelines for clergy who qualified for the necessary paperwork to prove we were allowed out of our homes in order to officiate at funerals. My colleagues and I all had to add a trip to the police station to our list of pre-lockdown preparations so that we could get our official letters stamped with official stamps. And we had to carry these letters and our ID with us in the case of leaving home to officiate. And this was all we knew. I was the first one from our team to officiate during lockdown. I had to discuss with the rest of my household how to navigate leaving and re-entering the house. Would I need to quarantine afterward? Would I stop on the way to or from the funeral to pick up groceries or items from the pharmacy? I took one of the cloth masks we had managed to get just a few days before, a major feat at that time because they were impossible to find, and a gallon of hand sanitizer and 3 pairs of latex gloves, and I left the house for the first time in 14 days. I drove through very empty streets, through a very quiet city. I counted the cars that I passed so that I could report back. There were 30, and it was a 20-minute drive. I checked my glove compartment at least 3 times to make sure my documentation was there if I got stopped by the police or by the military who were patrolling during those 6 weeks of lockdown. I tried to quell my panic and center my rabbinic self so that I could be and do my best for this family, who were surely feeling all the same panic and fear about being out in this ghost town version of Cape Town, on top of their grief and the pain of their loss. There were 8 mourners. At that time, only 10 plus the rabbi was allowed. We hadn't figured out the whole Zoom funeral thing yet, so we didn't have any additional people or additional tech. The funeral home had paper masks for those who didn't have their own. The funeral was quiet and sad, more sad and more quiet than funerals from before. I apologized that we couldn't stand closer together, that we couldn't hug, that they couldn't see my face. Afterward, I drove straight home, used a side entrance, went straight to the bathroom, took a scalding hot shower, cried. Now we're used to it. We're allowed to have up to 50 people at the cemetery. Sometimes they're good at following the rules. Sometimes we still have to step back too quickly and remind them too sternly. Our team has the Zoom funeral and Shiva down to a fine art. We have one rabbi in the cemetery and one in Zoom. We have someone at the cemetery with a phone streaming to Zoom. We have nicer, reusable masks and those horrible plastic visors. And the cemetery workers stand at the grave with hand sanitizer and spray each person's hands before and after they shovel dirt into the grave. We've adapted as rabbis, as post-mortem professionals. We have adapted. This past week, my great-uncle Monty passed away at the impressive age of 98. As a mourner, I have not adapted. I'm not used to not being able to go home and be with my family. I'm not used to watching my grandmother on a screen as she mourns her brother instead of being at her side, holding her hand, as I did at my grandfather's funeral and at my uncle's. I'm not used to not being able to see my father as he gives his beautiful eulogies, not being able to hug him afterward. I'm not used to knowing all my cousins are there in the interweb somewhere watching along with me, but not being able to see their faces, since this service was broadcast one way and not in Zoom, which, for the record, I really don't recommend. It didn't feel like we were together. It felt lonely and disconnected. I am grateful that the video and sound quality were excellent, that I could see my grandmother clearly and my cousins who were there. My mother and I watched together on FaceTime, and we played a game of trying to guess who was who behind the masks. I'm grateful that both the rabbi and the cantor who officiated were close friends of mine, and that I knew my family was being looked after and cared for and guided by people I trust to do it well. I'm grateful that my father was able to give his eulogy over the phone via a Bluetooth speaker held up to a microphone, and that we could all hear him as clearly as if we were standing there together. I am grateful, but I have not adapted. I do not want to adapt. We should not have to adapt. As a rabbi, I innovate. As a member of a clergy team, I'm proud of how we evolve as we must. As a Jew, I'm in awe of how we can bring ancient rituals and modern technologies together to keep our traditions alive. But as a mourner, I am sad and I am angry and I am bereft. I don't want us to evolve and adapt. I want to get on a plane and wrap my arms around my loved ones and comfort them and be comforted. As a rabbi, I don't know how to fix this for those who are mourning loved ones from afar. I only know how to pray that this is temporary.
Amen. We need it to be temporary.
Yeah, we need to start thinking about happier things. Listeners, we'll do better. But I feel like that's maybe where a lot of you are too. So
Yeah. We're sending a
hopefully,
lot of virtual hugs out to you all, and feel
send
free to
it.
send them back.
Please. Clearly, we need them. Also, I'll say there is a reason that we don't do funerals in the evening, like that we do them morning and afternoon, because it's incredibly depressing to sit through a funeral and then go to bed, which is what I had to do because of the time difference. I really don't recommend it.
No,
Yeah.
no. Yeah, Shiva Minyan's hard enough.
Yeah. But like by then you've had some time to like
Yeah.
decompress.